No one expected the global LNG race to flip in a single moment. But that's exactly what happened when Washington hit the brakes, sending shockwaves through the world's energy markets. Buyers froze, analysts scrambled, and for the first time in a decade, the biggest exporter on Earth looked uncertain. It wasn't a war, a disaster, or a political meltdown that caused it. It was one pause, one hesitation that sent the entire system tilting. And at the exact same time the United States stepped back, Canada stepped forward. It felt almost cinematic, like two stories unfolding in perfect sync. As America reconsidered its future, British Columbia quietly ignited its own. LNG Canada switched on real volumes, ships began loading, and suddenly, a country that had spent years debating its energy identity was being treated like a serious global supplier. And when Ksi Lisims secured its approvals just months later, industry insiders began whispering a question that no one dared ask publicly. Did Canada just take the advantage no one saw coming? This is Northern Pulse, and today we're unpacking the moment Washington slowed down, Canada surged ahead, and Asia realized the Pacific might have a new energy powerhouse. The full story is far bigger and stranger than anyone expected. The global LNG landscape didn't shift gradually. It snapped. On January 26, 2024, the U.S. Department of Energy paused new LNG export approvals. The announcement was framed as routine, temporary, procedural. But energy markets don't react to press releases. They react to fear. And this pause wasn't just a pause. It created a ripple that immediately exposed how dependent the world had become on American certainty. Buyers who had been negotiating billions in long-term deals instantly pulled back. Countries in Asia, Europe, and Latin America needed clarity, not hesitation, and suddenly, Washington couldn't give them that. The DOE began raising internal questions that rattled the entire industry. Are we overbuilding? Are long-term environmental models sustainable? What if demand projections are wrong? These weren't just technical concerns, they were signals. Signals that the world's biggest LNG exporter was stepping into self-doubt. Rumors spread fast. Some analysts claimed Washington feared its LNG boom had created a bubble. Others suggested internal political pressure pushed the DOE to reevaluate climate risks. And while no theory gained consensus, every one of them had the same effect. They made buyers nervous. Uncertainty is a currency no energy superpower can afford to lose. And while the U.S. hesitated, the rest of the world started asking the real question. If America slows down, who fills the gap? But no one imagined the answer would come from a coastline that had been ignored for years. While Washington paused, Canada accelerated. The timing was almost too perfect to ignore. On June 30, 2025, just as global buyers were still processing the U.S. shock, LNG Canada switched on Phase 1. 14 million tons per year, live, instantly, without uncertainty and without hesitation. For years, critics had accused Canada of being too slow, too cautious, too bogged down in environmental assessments to compete with Gulf Coast giants. But suddenly, those same critics were scrambling to understand how British Columbia had quietly become the most interesting LNG story of the year. Western LNG's CEO didn't bother hiding his reaction. He called the U.S. pause bullish for Canada, a rare moment when industry language dropped the usual diplomacy. What he meant was simple. With America on hold, Canadian LNG has the runway all to itself. Even more surprising were the whispers circulating among energy insiders. Some claimed Canada had been preparing for this moment, predicting that the U.S. would eventually hit a political or environmental wall. Whether true or not, the effect was the same. Canada appeared ready, organized, and strategically positioned in a way no one appreciated until the pause exposed the gap. And LNG Canada alone wasn't the whole story. The real shock was waiting in the wings. Ksi Lisims LNG was once treated like an ambitious idea. Interesting, but not essential. Then, in September 2025, it cleared both federal and provincial approvals in a streamlined assessment that caught even optimistic analysts off guard. Suddenly, a project many considered possible someday became the project everyone began watching. 12 million tons per year, a floating LNG design, a tighter permitting timeline than anyone expected. And then, the real headline: Shell and Total Energies locking in 20-year contracts before construction even began. In the energy world, that is the difference between a dream and a guaranteed future. Speculation bubbled immediately. Some reports suggested Japanese and South Korean officials had privately urged Canada to accelerate LNG approvals after witnessing the instability of U.S. policy. These claims remain unverified, but insiders swear the timing wasn't accidental. The demand was real, the gap was obvious, and Ksi Lisims was perfectly placed to fill it. But Ksi Lisims didn't just add volume. It reshaped North America's entire energy geometry. With two major terminals, LNG Canada and Ksi Lisims, Canada suddenly had 26 million tons per year lined up. No longer symbolic, no longer theoretical. And what made all of this explosive wasn't the supply. It was where that supply sat on the map. Sometimes geography is destiny, and for Canada, this was the advantage no amount of U.S. engineering could erase. From British Columbia's coast, LNG tankers are a short and direct crossing away from the world's largest importers: Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Meanwhile, U.S. LNG must navigate the Panama Canal, a corridor choked with congestion, drought-driven delays, and geopolitical unpredictability. Every extra day at sea is extra cost, extra risk, and extra uncertainty. After living through the chaos of the 2021 to 2023 energy shocks, Asian buyers began prioritizing one thing above all else: stability. Price mattered, but predictability mattered more. Canada offered shorter shipping times, lower transit risk, fewer geopolitical choke points, a calm Pacific route, and an increasingly reputation as a steady democratic supplier. These weren't marketing lines, these were measurable strategic advantages. In Tokyo, energy researchers reportedly began calling Canada the Qatar of the North Pacific. It wasn't an official label, but the buzz caught attention. Buyers wanted a long-term partner that wouldn't swing unpredictably between political extremes. And just like that, Canada became not just convenient, but desirable. Global LNG demand isn't slowing. Forecasts point to a 60% surge by 2040 and potentially a doubling by 2050. And nearly all that growth comes from Asia. So when Canada's first 2025 cargoes began moving across the Pacific, they weren't traveling blind. More than half were expected to land in South Korea, a sign of just how aggressively Asian utilities embraced this new Canadian supply. But here's where things get interesting. South Korean media began quietly speculating that Canada could become their top LNG supplier by the early 2030s. Japanese analysts echoed the sentiment, pointing out that diversification away from the United States wasn't political, it was practical. The global narrative shifted. Importers began describing Canada as risk-stable, long-horizon friendly, politically predictable, and a critical part of their future energy mix. For decades, Canada struggled to define its energy identity. And now, almost effortlessly, it had become the Pacific's safest bet. But Canada wasn't relying only on market luck. What's happening along British Columbia's coast is unprecedented. 7 LNG projects, some active, some under construction, some deep in advanced planning, have formed what insiders now call Canada's Pacific LNG Corridor. And the scale is massive. If even 6 of these projects advance, total investment could reach $109 billion, making it one of the largest energy build-outs in Canadian history. LNG Canada is already exploring Phase 2, which could double output to nearly 28 million tons per year. Ksi Lisims is moving through streamlined assessments, proving Canada can approve major projects without the delays that defined the past decade. Federal officials hinted a shift in strategy: accelerate strategic infrastructure to shield Canada from external trade risks, including tariff volatility from the United States. The message is subtle but clear. Canada isn't just exporting LNG, it's building a long-term geopolitical anchor. But even with unprecedented momentum, the clock is ticking. Canada's advantage is real, but it isn't permanent. Analysts warn the window is somewhere between 5 and 10 years. After that, global transitions could reshape the LNG landscape. The U.S. remains a powerhouse. Its problem is growth, not scale. Once the pause reviews end, Gulf Coast megaprojects could resume at a pace Canada cannot easily match. And when that happens, competition will tighten. That's why every 20-year contract Canada signs right now matters. Every ship it loads, every project it accelerates. In energy, early trust becomes long-term dominance. Speculation inside industry circles suggests Canada may hold the Pacific edge until 2035. Some insiders are even bolder, claiming Canada could secure the region's long-term buyers before the U.S. fully restarts expansion. Whether optimistic or cautious, everyone agrees on one thing: timing decides everything. But timing alone isn't the real story. This is the uncomfortable question energy leaders are whispering behind closed doors. By pausing approvals, the U.S. gave Canada a rare combination of advantages all at once. New supply coming online at the exact right moment. The shortest, safest route to Asia. A reputation for political and regulatory stability. Buyers desperate for predictable long-term partners. A Pacific corridor ready for expansion. The power balance didn't flip by force. It flipped by hesitation. The U.S. introduced doubt. Canada introduced certainty. And global buyers noticed. In a world where energy equals influence, Canada suddenly holds something it has rarely possessed: leverage. Not because it is the biggest, but because it is currently the most reliable. And in the LNG world, reliability is king. The story of Canada's rise in the LNG world isn't about pipelines, politics, or mega projects. It's about timing, perception, and trust. The United States paused to reconsider its future, and in that single moment of hesitation, the global market looked elsewhere for leadership. Canada didn't force its way into the spotlight. It simply stepped forward when the opportunity opened. This shift was subtle, almost invisible at first. A pause here, an approval there, a contract signed quietly. But when you zoom out, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Canada's LNG sector is no longer a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It is a reality shaping the Pacific's energy future. And whether intentional or accidental, this alignment of geography, global demand, and political stability created something rare. A window where a mid-sized exporter can influence the direction of an entire region. But none of this guarantees dominance. The U.S. will return to expansion. Global transitions will accelerate. Environmental pressures will tighten. And the competition for long-term contracts will intensify. Canada's challenge is not just to seize this moment. It is to convert it into a decade-long foothold. What makes this moment historic is not that Canada beat the U.S., but that the world recognized Canada as a dependable partner at a time when dependability meant everything. Buyers want stability. Roots matter. Trust shapes markets more than raw volume ever could. So the question isn't whether Canada can match the Gulf Coast project for project. The question is whether Asia sees Canada as the steadier hand in an unstable energy world. And right now, that answer looks clearer than it ever has.